Great, thank you. Dan, you are live.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good evening and welcome to the February 24th, 2021 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Haywood, would you please call roll?
Thank you. And just as a reminder, those who are in attendance, if you're attending remotely and the location where you are. With that, Bowman.
Present, attending remotely from East Lansing, Michigan.
Thank you. Boyle. Cahill. I think you're on mute, Cahill. Not yet.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
I'm present and attending from my home in East Lansing, Michigan.
Thank you. Lapine.
Present and attending from my home in East Lansing, Michigan.
Sullivan.
Present and attending remotely from East Lansing, Michigan.
Thank you. Wagner. Williams.
Good evening, everybody. I'm present and attending remotely from my home in East Lansing.
Thank you. Wolf.
Here, attending electronically from East Lansing, Michigan.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. That will bring us on to item 1.2, the approval of the agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda presented to us.
Cahill, I move to approve the agenda for this evening.
Wolf, second.
Thank you. That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Wolf to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion on that motion? Oh, excuse me, let me back up. I've done this a number of times, but I forget that we're supposed to thank everybody for this new technology and your continued patience in these meetings, appreciating that there's a motion on the floor. All members of the public will have a chance to address the commission during public comment and during each public hearing. Each commission member will be called on individually to speak during each item. A commission member may say pass if they do not have a comment for that item. Commission members are reminded to state their names before speaking, making a motion, etc., and all votes of consequence will be taken by a roll call vote. This being not of terrible consequence, I will ask for a voice vote if there is no discussion on the motion to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, that motion carries. Moving us on to item 1.3, the approval of the minutes. You have in your packets a copy of the draft minutes for the February 10th, 2021 meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes as presented.
Williams, so moved.
Cahill, support.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Williams and seconded by Commissioner Cahill to approve the minutes. Any discussion on that motion? Once again, let's have a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, that motion carries as well. We have no committee reports this evening, which will move us on to item 3, Mr. Haywood, staff reports, or Ms. Schmidt.
I have just a brief update on council action last night. The item for 270 West Grand River Avenue, this is the former Big B location where they were to demo that and build a parking lot. They deferred action on that to May 25th by the applicant's request. Also, they set a public hearing for the Falcon Point modified site plan for March 23rd. That's all for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Haywood? All right, then that'll move us on to item 4, commissioner announcements. Do any commissioners have any announcements? I will pass on my both, I guess, congratulations and encouragement to Mr. Haywood and his recent announcement of departure from the city. I'm sure we all will miss him dearly, but wish him the best of luck in this new endeavor. What an opportunity for you to pursue this. I think it's a dream of yours to work the land rather than working the city. So it's more urban, or excuse me, more rural, less urban, I guess, but with attention to detail.
Yeah, definitely excited about it. Sad to go, bittersweet, but it seems to be the right time for me and my family to pursue that. And I've enjoyed working with you all very, very much. Your professionalism and attention to detail is just something that I would like to take with me in everything that I do. So thanks for being a good example for me to carry forward.
Absolutely. And you are with us until the end of March, is that correct?
Yeah, April 2nd is my official last day. Yeah.
Any other commissioner announcements? All right, then that'll move us on to item 5, communications from citizens. This is the time in our meeting when we would typically invite members of the public to come forward and make a comment to the commission. Of course, now that we're doing it remotely, we'll move on to public comment remotely and invite each caller in our queue to make comments up to 5 minutes to the commission. And at the end of 5 minutes, the commenter will be placed on hold, or excuse me, will be placed on mute. Callers will be identified by the last 3 digits of their phone number. When called upon, you will be unmuted. If you do not wish to speak, please indicate so by saying pass. If you do wish to speak, please clearly state your name and address before addressing the commission. This is not a requirement, but it does help us in keeping minutes for this meeting. I see that we do have one visitor. And I don't know who, Rebecca, Ms. Urdialis, are you keeping the gate this evening?
I can do it. All right, so looks like we have, for a second there, we had 2 callers. We have one caller with the last 3 digits, 240. You have been unmuted and allowed to speak.
Hi, this is Diane Wing, 1024 Huntington Road. I'm chair of the Historic District Commission, but also a resident of the Chesterfield Hills neighborhood, which is part of the Shaping the Avenue plan that runs Michigan Avenue side all the way up to the Delta Triangle. I don't have any comments at this point. I'm just here to listen to the other feedback and attend the work session for the Shaping the Avenue section, item 9. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wing.
Thank you. It looks like we have one other caller now. Last 4 digits, 470. You are unmuted and able to speak. We have 5 minutes. Go ahead again, caller. We can barely hear you.
Okay. Yep. This is Tim Rosowski. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Tim.
Yep. I wasn't sure. I was interested in the form-based code discussion later on. Okay. Is it better?
Tim, you're probably talking through your phone, but listening through your computer, I'm thinking.
Yes.
Well, we're getting the feedback from you and now me. When you call into a radio program, they ask you to turn your radio down.
Is it better? Okay. How's that?
That's good. I'm not hearing the echo, so that sounds good. Yes, please proceed.
Okay. Yeah, I was interested in the form-based code discussion that will follow. I attended the last meeting and just heard a kind of part of that discussion. And there were three items. A couple came up last time in terms of what my review comments meant. And so I did have one comment. I think there was some discussion of the eve, and my preference would be that there would be no eve requirement. So I'm fine if there is a distance if an eve is provided. But generally, I thought from an architectural standpoint, we could make an argument that somebody could do good architecture with eaves or without eaves. And I think that's kind of a stylistic thing. So I think my name came up as what my intent was, and that was my intent, was that there would be no requirement. The second one, there was some discussion on the front porches, and I followed up after the meeting with an email comment that I was sitting at my front desk at my office and looking across the street, and there were 3 houses that did not have front porches, existing houses. One was a Cape Cod style, and its appearance would not be improved by adding a covered front porch. So I think that that's really kind of an architectural question. Dan and you and I had the discussion about pattern language. So personally, in my own projects, I usually do a front porch, but I think it could certainly there'd be certain architectural styles that wouldn't really warrant it. And in fact, the covered front porch might be out of place with some styles. So I think it should not be required. And then the third comment I wanted to make was just I was looking at the summary statements about the review comments. And there was one comment that I wanted to clarify that I made, and it was referring to the alleys. So I think the way it got characterized in the minutes or however the summary was prepared, it said that what I was saying was no alleys north of Linden. And I wasn't really saying that. If you look at my review comments, I indicated very specific blocks where I thought that the alleys they weren't feasible. So just to reiterate those, that was the 400 block bounded by Abbott and Park Lane, which is where City Hall is. So, I don't think we're really going to get an alley put in into that block. And likewise, I think the blocks bounded by 400 and 500 blocks of Grove Street, bounded by Grove, on the east, and Park Lane on the west, and then also the 600 block of Grove, bounded by Grove on the east and Abbott on the west. So my comments were on very specific blocks, but I didn't make a wholesale comment because it sounded like in the summary comments these would go to council. And I just wanted to clarify that mine were on specific blocks, not a wholesale comment of everything north of Linden as the summary was written. And then I'll be staying on, so if there are any questions later on, if it's appropriate, if there's one of my review comments that's being discussed and somebody has a question, I'll be available.
Thank you, Mr. Marzowski.
Okay.
Thank you. We have no other callers in queue.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you. That will. We did receive some written communication. In fact, I'm not sure that Tim's back and forth from me made it into the packet, but it will find itself in future packets, as well as a couple of other comments from citizens regarding the form-based code. So nothing that necessarily needs to be brought up at this point, given that it was associated with another agenda item. Then that'll move us on to, we have no public hearings or old business this evening, so it'll move us on to our first item of new business, item 8.1. This is consideration of a farm, land, and open space application for the property at 6503 Park Lake Road. Is this you, Mr. Haywood?
Yes, thank you. So this is a request from Joan and David Johnson regarding the property at 6503 Park Lake. This is kind of southeast of the sod farm area in the northern tier within the city, just outside of the city of East Lansing. It's about 58 acres. They are proposing a local open space easement for the property for the term of 90 years. What they're proposing is that the property would not be developed during that term to receive certain tax credit benefits. By state law, the application is supposed to be forwarded to any planning commission of any city or village within 3 miles of the site. So since they meet that qualification, it's lands on our agenda tonight. And really all we need to do is either provide no comment or take action to provide specific comment, or we can just relay back the comments that are brought up during conversation. So with that, I'll leave it up for discussion.
Just by way of a point of order, bookkeeping, Vice Chair Boyle joined us at about 7:10, right about the time we were hearing public comment during communication. So, and she's with us still. So are there any questions for Mr. Haywood regarding this application? Commissioner Wolf?
Yes. Is this something that City Council will also consider and provide comments on, or is it only for the Planning Commission?
Only for the planning commission.
And so just so I understand, was this going to be, this is basically this entire 58 acres is going to be left undeveloped for 90 years? I took a look, or I tried to take a look at the site. I think I went down the wrong road at one point and sort of found myself on a farm that said, do not enter. So I stopped, but I've got a pretty good idea about where it is. Is the intention then that sort of this isn't just going to be, when I typically think of an easement, it's sort of a way to get from, say, a road to a isolated parcel, but this is an easement of over the entire 58 acres.
That's correct. It'd be an easement over the entire acreage for a promise not to develop it. I think there are qualifying activities that can happen on the site. One of them is farming, that kind of thing. So, which I think is what they do. But so yeah, I would just follow the land for that term. If they were to develop it after a certain period, then they would have to pay back the tax credits received, I think, for the prior 7 years. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Haywood? Commissioner Wolf, sorry.
Yeah, I'm curious what development means. And just to give an example, suppose they wanted to, I assume there's a house on the property. Is that, I think they're living there, is that right? Or, and anyway, my question, if they wanted to tear down the house that's there and build a new house, would that be prohibited under this?
That I'm not sure. I'm guessing the developed portion of the property might not be included in the full acreage, but I don't know the qualifying criteria for the program. It's really, that level of detail is left up to, I think, MDARD, which is the overseeing agency for this easement. But I think developed portions are probably excluded from that acreage, but I don't know for sure.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Commissioner Cahill.
Dave, are we the taxing authority? In other words, are we granting the tax credit, or would it be Meridian? Or
I believe that it would be Meridian. Since it's not in the city, it would be Meridian. And for whatever reason, the 3 mile criteria for notifications, like all the planning commissions that have jurisdiction within 3 miles are supposed to review this. And I think it's for the purpose of, the term is so long that if there were any planned areas, for this property that might overlap into common interest among other jurisdictions, then people would want to know about it if it did affect future plans. So, but it doesn't really affect us since it's not within our planning sphere in terms of future land use. But we do are required by law to at least consider it.
so no fiscal implications to the city of East Lansing?
Not on this one, no. Coincidentally, they're also applying for an open space easement for property inside the city. But oddly, it doesn't go to our planning commission. It goes to, because it's in Clinton County, as part of the sod farm, the old sod farm, it goes to Clinton County. So strangely, the ones that are in the city don't go to the local planning commission. They go to the county agency. It's an odd situation, but that's, we've had our city attorney review these applications to make sure they're going to the right place at the right time, since they have a little more experience with this than staff does. But that was our direction, to provide it to Clinton County, the one that's inside the city, and Meridian Townships come to East Lansing Planning Commission. So kind of an odd situation, but that's the explanation.
Are those contiguous properties that we're talking about?
There are there are two or three, at least three parcels, I think, in the city, two of which are contiguous, but another is separate, but they're all part of that northern tier, the old sod farm property. It's not likely that anything's going to be developed there anywhere because of the soils, but that one will have actually, the one inside the city doesn't go to the planning commission, but it does end up at council. So there will be an authority within the East Lansing that will have some say in the matter. That one will have a financial implication, but it won't be much.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Wolf, did I see your hand again?
Yes, but Dave just answered what I was going to ask about.
All right. It looks like the township is looking for comments if we have any. Do you need a motion on this, or is it really just if we choose to comment, we do? And
I don't need a motion. Would only need a motion if you wanted to formalize it, be part of the record kind of thing. But if there are no significant comments, we can just write back to them that upon discussion, there were no significant concerns.
I'll look to the commission for any direction. I see a couple of heads shaking, so I'll presume that oh, and a thumbs up, even better. So I think that we're satisfied that this will be suitable, and wish them well, I guess. Is it necessary? That said, is it necessary to have a public hearing on this? This is
no public hearing required. And I'll just write back to them to say that there were no concerns raised about the proposal.
All right, thank you. And that'll move us on to item 8.2, the 2020 annual project review. You all received a copy of this in your packet. Are there, Mr. Haywood, or I'm presuming Mr. Haywood, did you have anything you wanted to add to the as a report?
No, this is just briefly though. This is just a requirement of the Planning Enabling Act that we, basically summarize the activities of the Planning Commission for the past or prior annual calendar year, so this is the opportunity just to kind of review the work that was done and the actions that were taken by the Planning Commission relative to land use development. And then what we do is we provide the summary, this project review summary, and then the Planning Commission is satisfied that that's an accurate summary of the year's work. Then what we do is we kind of formalize that as a report and then put it on file, and then also forward a copy of it to the City Council so they have a reference document for the year's work.
Any questions for Mr. Haywood regarding the report? I'm just curious, does the Zoning Board of Appeals see this as well? I see that a fair amount of the work is actually stuff that they have done.
They don't. We generally have not requested their input on it nor forwarded it to them. I mean, I think we deal with, so few actions by that board that they can probably remember all of them. But so we don't forward it to them.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Haywood? All right. Will it be necessary to suspend the rules to act on this evening?
I don't think that's necessary since we don't have a public hearing for it, so there aren't typically two meetings that we would do on this. So just a simple motion tonight should suffice.
All right. There's language at the top of in the staff report, page 20 of 142 of our packets.
I would move to Cahill speaking. I would move to approve the City of East Lansing Planning Commission annual report for 2020 and direct staff to forward a copy to the City Council as correspondence.
Wolf, second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Wolf to approve the Planning Commission annual report and forward that to City Council. Is there any discussion on that motion? I'm seeing none. Just for, given that this is more or less official business. No, it is official business. Let's have a roll call vote here. And please, Mr. Haywood.
Coleman,
Yes.
Boyle,
Yes.
Cahill,
yes,
Lapine,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Wolf.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. That will bring us on to item 9, our work session for shaping the avenue. As we continue our review of public comments and action items on this topic. Ms. Schmidt, I see that you've done a fair amount of work and have reformatted your staff report. Did you want to open comments by explaining what we've done here? And
Sure. Just to move things forward a little bit, we have added another category, one that should basically items that should be handled by the city council. Of course, any planning commissioner, if they choose to pull that back off the city council list, feel free to do so. However, those are items that Mr. Haywood and I have looked through and felt that they would be better handled by the city council and wouldn't need any further discussion by the planning commission unless they chose to do so. The remaining are as they were before, and we did get a attorney opinion again on the bonus requirements for the fee in lieu of. So that was added to your packet as well.
so you're specifically talking about the items that you've added the blue text, starting with item 19 and then through the end.
Yes.
So we had
Yes.
we had ended last or 2 weeks ago on item 18. And then so staff has taken the initiative to basically provide some thoughts about the remaining items in that particular list and provided some directions. I would be inclined to go through them just bit by bit, but this was Mr. Haywood and I had a discussion about this at our last meeting and after our last meeting. And I had some thoughts as I was considering how the pace at which this was moving, that I decided that for my own review, that I would take a page from Commissioner Williams' book and essentially defer to those things that if they're in the code right now and there doesn't seem to be any specific reason to remove it or to modify it, to leave it in for the time being. We've received any number of public comments about this particular ordinance. We almost certainly will receive more. We received one this past week. And that if we continue to meet on this sort of indefinitely as the comments continue to roll in, we might never get a packet to pass off to council. That said, I don't expect that, if there's things that we don't cover in great detail this evening, there's no reason why at some future meeting or when public, when we start to present this information to the public, why it couldn't be raised at that point. So handle this the way that you feel most comfortable with it. But as I say, I'm inclined to take my own personal take is that a little bit more of a laissez-faire attitude about how this might be handled, with the understanding that this is not a finished document by any means yet, and that we will see, send a good document to council, and then they'll have their way at it as well, and we'll work on it after they're done with it too. So that said, item 19, we left where we left off last time, and actually items 19 through 26 are all available for discussion. So why don't we just start with 19 and move our way through that? I presume you've all had the opportunity to review Ms. Schmidt's comments. And if there are any that you want to sort of remove from the consent agenda and put on the business agenda, let's do that now. Item 19 has to do with satellite dishes, and some comments were made about zoning and historic districts. Any?
I know I'm having trouble.
I don't know who that was.
And Kathy,
Okay. There you go.
Commissioner Boyle had her world turned upside down.
Do you want to put side light on and turn the overhead off?
All right. Yes, you look angelic. There we go.
I'm sorry, but I can't get in with the iPad, and the phone presents other difficulties in this particular location. So
We can see.
that's
and
where
hear
that's
you.
where we're at.
There we go. That's fine. Any issues with item 19 regarding satellite dishes? All right, then I will, again, do feel free to stop if, I want to reiterate that in as much as we're likely to move a little bit more quickly on some of these than we have in the past, there's no reason why we can't discuss any one of them in greater detail if that's your pleasure. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, because the question came up about satellite dishes, would it help or is it desirable to put something in the code saying that they are not regulated? I mean, the thought is they would come in under mechanical equipment, or would it help to clear things up if we put it in there rather than just leave it unmentioned as it is?
Go ahead, Mr. Haywood.
Yeah, we could. I mean, there's a section of our code that deals with certain things that either are exempt or protrude into certain areas that could be exempt. So we can explore where that might go, but it might be worth mentioning that. I'm not sure how or what method we would do that, but just to clear that, it's probably a good idea.
For example, we have the section, I don't know, we're in 8 something about the roofs and list permitted roof elements. And a satellite dish is not shown there. And someone might conclude from that that it's not a permitted element. That would be an example of a place to look if we're thinking about where it might go in here.
There we go. That's on page 45 of the document. Permitted roof, 604 D2.
Yes, 45. And of course, a roof is not the only place that you might find a satellite dish. It's just one example.
Well, let us put our thinking caps on about the best approach to addressing that, because like you say, it's not just one area. We're actually preempted from regulating it. So it's not so much that we can permit it and then establish how it can be permitted. It's that we can't regulate it. Satellite dishes up to a certain size or under a certain size. We have, the only circumstance would be in the historic district. And even then, it can only be when it's, I think, in the way of opening doors and things like that, that it can be regulated. It's more of a safety issue than an appearance issue. And we can't regulate the location either. So we'll have to think about that one. It may be better to put it in another part of our zoning code altogether, but we'll take a look at it.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Then on to item 20. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Williams.
I guess my only comment would be is if we're preempted, why do we need to say anything at all at this point? We don't talk about things that we're preempted from regulating in other respects, do we? Just a question.
Yeah, not very often we don't include things that you say that something's preempted, but a lot of times it happens because it was preempted after the code was written, or, Sure. So like I said, we'll have to think about that one to see what's the best way to do that with a minimal approach.
Well, the question seems to be, what about satellite dishes? Sometimes they need to be on the front of a building to get a signal. Perhaps the answer to the person asking the question is just a reference back to the preemption, not necessarily a change in the draft. Just a thought.
I would tend to agree with that approach. Because if someone's proposing a dish, they would either know what they can do. What's interesting is I think the installers know this, but sometimes zoning officials don't. I mean, there was a circumstance years ago that I ran into that taught me about this. It's not very often that we run into the situation where we have to even apply that or know that. So maybe it's worth not mentioning. I don't know. If there's a consensus to leave it out, we can settle that right now and just, without anybody objecting, just leave it out. Reply to the comment.
Any objections? Okay, that sounds like there you go. We'll leave it alone then. Did I see another hand? Sorry. All right, item 20, regarding questions regarding the lack of any parking requirement. Ms. Schmitz clarified that by saying that in order to determine the appropriate number of barrier-free spaces, and that the requirement is to provide a parking plan so that the parking won't have an impact on other properties and so on. So any thoughts about this question or this item? All right, then item 21, the language regarding existing rentals, and Ms. Schmitz replying that there's language in the existing zoning chapter 50 regarding non-conforming regulations. You see that that's quoted extensively in the response here. Thoughts about this? No issues. Okay. Item 22, can consider changing the color of the historic district overlay map so that they're not confused with the colors of the street fronts. This is a conversation that Mr. Marzowski and I had. And it sounds like that Ms. Schmidt's on board with that as well, that he was reading I don't remember which one, College Grove Historic District's color is very similar to the R2 zone or something like that. And so when the two ordinances are overlaid, which they should be, so that we can see what the extent of the historic district within the Avenue Form regulating plan, there was some confusion as to what the different frontages were. So I think that's a good solution. Any thoughts about that? I can't imagine anybody has any objection until you see the colors, perhaps. Item 23, it may be clear to most persons reading the plan how to address houses in the historic district. I think that the response here is well put. I think, again, he's on the line, so he can either maybe confirm or not, but I think Mr. Marzowski, who raised this as well, his issue was more that it wasn't entirely clear that the historic district, I mean, it might even be just a matter to say that, because I think we refer to the Secretary of the Interior standards rather than specifically to the local historic district commission. And so I think that what's being stated here is exactly right. The house would be addressed no differently, or houses or buildings or resources of any type than they are currently addressed in any of the local historic districts. That would be exactly the same. Thoughts about item 23? Mr. Haywood?
Just real briefly, maybe for those commissioners here that might not be totally familiar with the Historic District Commission process, but the property, like for example, a site plan review, it goes through the Planning Commission, public hearing, and then action. There's a referral made to the City Council. City Council reviews it and approves it, and then it goes to the Historic District Commission for approval by them. So it's possible that you could have a development proposal that gets through our process and seems to meet everything with code, but then has some issue with the Historic District Commission at the back end. What we've been doing is encouraging applicants very early in the process to go to the Historic District Commission with a conceptual description or proposal so that they understand what's coming and can give some feedback at that time, not necessarily an approval, but some preliminary feedback before they get on the back end of that. So this is more just for reference so everybody understands what that comment means. So it's possible under form-based code requirements that you might have some drastically different architectural interpretations through the process before it goes to the Historic District Commission. So I can see where that coming from a little bit, but the process would not really change, nor the standards for the Historic District Commission wouldn't change. So that process would remain the same.
Any questions or comments regarding this item? I think as long as it's made clear that wherever, whether it's an initial review or early or the end of the review process, that the Historic District Commission has an ordinance that they're responsible for overseeing as well. So that would certainly apply. Item 24, draft an opinion about how Ordinance 900 will impact the form-based code. And that's in process, Ms. Schmidt?
Not yet, but we will be doing that.
Right, but that's the intention, right? I just basically,
Right, yes.
I read the city attorney's opinion. I suspect that Mr. Cahill or Commissioner Cahill and Vice Chair Boyle were much more comfortable with the language than I was. Read very much like a legal, as it should, I suppose, a legal brief. But if it's in process, then I think that's about as good as we're going to get on that. Any issues with item 24? Item 25, get an opinion from city attorney how overlays will be impacted by the code if the changes overlap an existing overlay. Again, I'm presuming that that's in the works. And item 26 is what's being produced, what MEDC wants to see. I can see I presume you've all read the response here. Are there any comments about what's being stated here? I mean, I presume we care at least somewhat what MEDC wants to see, because that's why, what sort of initiated this all to begin with. Whether or not it's the same level of care that we had at the beginning, I couldn't say. Any issues regarding item 26? Okay, then that will move us on to the next series of topics. And these are topics that may require more discussion and likely information prior to a vote of the Planning Commission. The first one being the topic of bonus heights. And again, with the aforementioned legal opinion, again, I'll presume you've all read it. Ms. Schmidt, do you have any additional comments you want to make about that before we discuss this item?
No, I think the Planning Commission had discussed this a little bit briefly before, and the committee had spent quite some time doing research and came up with some really good options. But we were also briefed from our previous attorney as well as our new attorney that it's not something that they're really comfortable with. So, and we know that it would take a lot more planning and special plans to make it work. So I think with the second city attorney opinion, it's something that we should consider eliminating.
And it seemed to me that his not objection, but his biggest concern is that sort of how to quantify what's being, I guess, asked for as opposed to what's being provided. It's not taken, but what's being presumed as opposed to what's being provided as a benefit. That less concern about the green policy and significantly more because there was a sort of we would talked about some vague public pot of funds into which money would be paid that might pay for some sort of parking arrangement in some indefinite future, and that's what seemed to cause the attorney the biggest pause, is that there was not a specific project, sort of with quantifiable numbers of parking spaces or, area of parking provided to trade off the gain from the bonus. Any other or any thoughts, any further discussion about this? Is it? I mean, keep in mind that this is the additional heights are directly tied to the idea of these sort of bonus trade-offs, and that if they're limited to, well, there's a one regarding the city council's preference for seeing larger or taller buildings, and the one potentially that that the city attorney seemed to be comfortable with having to do with green building. But is anybody looking at that particular text in the code right now? I'm having a hard time finding it. There we go. Page 26 in the document, the November 17th, 2020 document. So in this case, it's items B and D, the new public plaza or civic green or new public parking west of Abbott, that are cause some concern, but that the diversified housing, which is currently in place, the green building potentially, which is not yet in place, but could be, and then the sort of catch-all significant public benefit as determined by city council. Commissioner Wolf.
I would just add that this is pretty much in line with the way we talked about this in the committee. We added these in here. Or maybe the plaza was in there already. I don't remember. But anyway, we found that there were other communities who have done this within their form-based codes. And they seemed interesting, but we did recognize right from the beginning these difficulties in actually implementing it. So we decided to leave them in for further discussion, thinking that they might very well come out anyway.
Or a solution might present itself. Yeah. Commissioner Cahill.
I read through the legal opinion kind of quickly, but I don't think it discussed the art requirement that we have. It seems like that would be very similar to what we're talking about here.
I read it through as thoroughly as I could. As I say, I'm not as comfortable with the language as Commissioner Williams as well. That sort of the legal minds on the commission. But it sounded to me like that he didn't, I don't recall him mentioning that either, but it seems to me that again, the city attorney's main concern was that there wasn't a specific, say, project or quantifiable object or project that could be used to balance, sort of what's being given in terms of, they're going to be building a particular, a certain number of additional floors in balance for some unknown plaza, green, or parking. Whereas I presume that by identifying a piece of art or a general piece of art would be sufficient to support the, is it 1%? 1% for art in each of the developments. So I don't remember seeing it, but my guess is that that's probably along the same line. Mr. Haywood.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the rationales there is that the art requirement is related to the site, and so you would ask for a piece of art to be on the site that would add to the beauty or the aesthetics or something, create interest. It's one of our goals as a city is to do this kind of thing. So it's related to not only our policy goals, but also our, to the site itself. And then they can choose not to do that by by paying for the value of it by not installing it. So they're making a choice there. So where these others, creating a civic green somewhere else, they don't have a choice in that matter. Paying into paying into a fund for parking or something like that, the choices seem to be not necessarily related to the site anymore exactly. That's kind of my takeaway from the letter. I'm not an attorney, but that's kind of what I took from that. But so maybe that helps.
But
Mr. Cahill.
they would pay into the art fund, which and then that's not related to the site anymore, where that art is put.
It isn't always, it is often, but it isn't always. You're right. Sometimes it's put in a kitty that's used in some remote location removed from that particular project. Oftentimes it is actually on the site of the project though.
I guess I'm maybe more inclined to think this would be largely defensible, but of course it would be individual. One thing I'd be worried about on this would be the public parking being west of Abbott Road. There's a practical reason. One is where places that are available to build parking are quite limited. So you're really limiting it if you put it west of Abbott Road. But more importantly on this issue, I think the attorney was talking about you need a nexus and that it be roughly proportionate. Well, if you're down on the east end of the avenue, and you're saying, well, you're going to throw in $25,000 to build a parking ramp on the west side of Abbott Road, I think you'd run into a big problem about the nexus to that project.
Thanks. Commissioner Wolf, did I see your hand?
Yeah. Just to be clear on item D about the public plaza or civic greens, we're only talking about removing item 2 in that, correct? The payment in lieu of. We would keep if they want to propose a plaza on their own property, it would still be an available option to gain a bonus. It's the payment in lieu of that was really questionable as to how we would implement it. And okay.
I don't see that anybody's shaking their head, so that would seem to make sense.
I mean, that's all that the attorney's opinion was about, was the payment in lieu of option, right?
All right, then are we ready to, are we going to leave this for a later date in order to make a final determination on it? I mean, Ms. Schmidt seems to be recommending that it be removed.
Just the fee and lieu part.
Right, exactly, yep. Commissioner Cahill.
I would be inclined to leave it in unless I heard an explanation why the art requirement's okay and this is not.
I'm not seeing any objection to that. Would that be inappropriate to ask the city attorney? I don't presume to know that for an opinion as to why the percent for art applies, but this might not. Okay. All right, then let's leave it in for the time being. Sorry, Mr. Haywood.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that, but I think what he's trying to comment on is what we asked about.
Sure.
We didn't ask about the
Understood
policy, and that's been in place and it's been standing and it seems to be going pretty well. But I think what we need to keep our focus on is what this code is proposing.
That's fine.
Kind of let the others stand as they are and keep chipping away what we need to work on here. And what he's recommending is that we don't pursue some of these options. So I would try to keep our focus on that if we can.
The only reason I ask is that we haven't really, at least that I can think of. Well, and maybe I'm wrong. There's been no place where we've removed great chunks of the of the text, but I have to go back and take a look. I mean, there's some places where we talked about adding things or clarifying things. What is the process by which we basically say that should be omitted or not? I guess that's what we're doing here. Commissioner Vice Chair Boyle, please.
Well, just speaking for me, I've never liked the payment in lieu of. I would at least like the commission to consider striking that before this is sent to council. I think there's a question of the legality. There's a big difference to me of handing cash over to the city without knowing what's going to happen to it, and some of the other specifics that are allowed here to earn a bonus. So I've never liked this section, and I would prefer it not go to council with this section included.
And I'm actually just thinking that, to correct myself, there have been places where we basically by either consent, we haven't really taken a vote, but by consensus, we've basically said that needs to be removed. And so any great objection to, that sounds like Commissioner Cahill, any other objections to removing item page 26, item 406B, both items 1 and 2, and 406D, item 2. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody ready to stand up and fight for either of those. So then let's move on to item back to our list. Staff report, page 4 of 6, item 2 under topics that may require more discussion. Discuss removing the housing bonus option and changing the multiple family housing in the M3 and M4 to require a special use permit to the requirement to all multiple family housing developments in those districts. It looks like staff have a future memo in underway right now. Is that okay? So we'll hear more about that at a later date. That moves us on to page 5 of 6. These are topics that need city council direction. And thanks for dividing a great number of these out. I'll just read through them, but if anybody feels that this is something that we could handle rather than council, any of these items, then certainly feel free to say so. Item 1, I'll just read it rather than trying to paraphrase. Seems like a drive-through on a corner lot where the drive-through window faces a side street as opposed to the main street would be fine, but not allowed with this language. Commissioner Wolf, thank you.
Yeah, I would speak in favor of that. I think that's an important thing to have if we're trying to shape the street space as we are. We don't want, the side street should be a pedestrian oriented space. And if you put a drive-through right next to it, you're defeating that purpose. So, I mean, council will see this, of course, and they could change that, but I am still strongly in favor of it as it's written.
Other thoughts? It's well put, by the way. Yeah, Commissioner Cahill.
I agree with Commissioner Wolf on this, and I know I've spoken about it before. The Starbucks that used to be a Burger King down by Tropical Smoothie. You create all kinds of traffic problems on the side street there, and so I think it should be prohibited.
Just to clarify then, Ms. Schmidt, that this list is as things that you perhaps thought were too. Again, as Mr. Wolf has said, the council's going to see these, but these were perhaps, I don't know, perhaps better, that they should definitely take these up, that perhaps these should be highlighted for their specific consideration, although I'm in agreement with what Commissioner Wolf has said as well, that perhaps council should be made aware of these items in particular, so that they can weigh in on them, particularly the ones we're about to look at. Mr. Haywood.
So I guess with those two comments, if there aren't objections, I think we addressed that one. It sounds like there's consensus to leave that the way it is.
So this we pulled from this list.
Make a note of that, and then that would go with that note. So
thank you. Good point. Then item 2, limiting developments to 3 or fewer bedrooms. While in a lot of, sorry, I'm reading, so I'm not going to be facing the screen. While in a lot of cases requiring building heights that will have to have elevators and sprinklers is going to make redevelopment economically challenging, to say the least. This is basically a question about 3 or fewer bedrooms per unit. It's something we've certainly talked about in the past. Mr. Haywood?
well, we have that requirement now, and it clearly has not stopped development. So unless there's a major epiphany about why we should change that policy, maybe we should just call this consensus to leave it alone and move forward.
Again, I'm of a mind that there's a discussion, that there's a topic that should be discussed, but I'm also of a mind to say that council is certainly aware of that issue, and will see this and will no doubt receive this, similar language when they're asked to review it. So I guess I'm sympathetic to the idea that perhaps more bedrooms per unit would be okay, but knowing full well that council will see this, I don't have an issue with sort of leaving it in its current form. Any thoughts? I guess the question is, should this be stricken from the list of things that specifically will require council direction? Vice Chair Boyle, thank you.
Well, I think that's an issue that council's going to really need to consider on this. And so I would leave it the way it is. But certainly council's got to make a decision on this. The past, as I look over the past few years, the desire has been not to have multi-unit apartments in the downtown area. That does have the impact that's mentioned here, is that you end up with, to get the density, you end up with higher buildings, and those are more expensive to build. And when you have an area like the East Village, where the apartments are making money, so it's not that it's, vacant land, it just becomes financially challenging to remodel or renovate them because of this limitation. But I think that's a council issue.
Any other comments on this item? Okay, this will remain, I'll just say, will remain something that specifically directed to council for input. Item 3, I realize this code is very different from the East Village Code, but what do we know about this, how this code might help, which is to say boost or hurt, prevent, which is to say prevent increases in revenues to this taxing jurisdiction, including East Lansing Public Schools, Ingham County, et cetera. Anybody want to provide some? It's a great question, but does anybody want to provide some insight on this one? And keep your comments to maybe like within 50 words or so. Yeah, I think it's well put. I don't think it's something that I know very much about, or wouldn't know much about without having to do a lot of digging. So this will remain an item for council, specifically for council. Item 4, if we don't know anything yet, what economic analysis is going to be done before council is asked to consider adopting this? Again, that's pretty clearly a council question. These are good questions, just not necessarily for planning commission. Excuse me. In what ways is the current draft use agnostic compared to our existing code? If it is not agnostic, would it make more sense to call this not a form-based code, but a zoning code that prescribes and proscribes uses as well as design? Anybody have any strong feelings about this? Commissioner Wolf?
Sure. This is very definitely a form-based code. And if you look at other form-based codes, they all have use restrictions. As far as I know, there is no form-based code that says any use goes anywhere. And if anyone had seen us in committee working on the use table, they would realize that the uses have changed significantly in this area. As we went through looking at the use table and deciding, okay, should this use be allowed in M4, M3, and so forth, we were extremely liberal about permitting uses that are not currently allowed in B3 or B2 and so forth. So I don't know how else to say it, except that it is extremely, in my mind, more permissive than our current code. And anyone who wants to not call it form-based because it has restrictions, still has some restrictions, I think is just off base on what a form-based code is.
Any other comments on item 5?
I mean, I suppose if it were super important, we could go through the tables and point out the many things that are now allowed that were not allowed before. But if anyone is interested, they could look through and compare them and see the differences.
Sure. I'm going to take item 6 as a really more of a comment, although it ends with a question mark. It's seems more of a concern or a comment as opposed to a question. Item 7, should the requirement for alleys be changed? Is it more realistic to limit the alley requirement to where an alley already exists? Who will own and maintain the alleys? This has been a issue I've had. It's been on my mind since this was first presented to us. Mr. Marzowski, who's presumably still on the line here, recommends eliminating requirements for alleys in certain portions of the city north of Linden. The suggestion here perhaps is that the alley requirement should be eliminated, since it will be difficult to implement. Again, that seems to me like something that council needs to consider, but it does require a fair amount of consideration for any number of items or a number of issues or points that we've talked about in the past. If I don't see a hands, I'll just continue to move forward. Then item 8, can you point to examples of cities like East Lansing where there is a densely constructed, highly occupied, low vacancy downtown, where a form-based code like this resulted in economic redevelopment that made a real difference in terms of lived experience and economic lift? In as much as again, it's sort of we're redirecting this to council, my guess is that that's going to come back to staff at some point, who I suspect have been looking already. Item 9, I have, this is concerns about a particular property on Evergreen and the utility project that's going to have some impact on that particular property. The owner was concerned that there wasn't going to be any legal street frontage for that property. And it seemed to me that you had responded, or there was some response. Oh no, maybe it was from Ms. McPherson. It was from the city engineer, a partial response. Anyway, legitimate concern of that somehow the reshaping of that, or at least the current plans for reshaping that portion of the city might remove street frontage for this particular property. And I'm not seeing any hands up. Item 10.
Dan?
Yep, I'm sorry. I still don't see. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Commissioner Sullivan, sorry.
All right, back to question number 8 real quick. I think Birmingham, Michigan was an example of a dense community with a form-based code.
Commissioner Wolf did more digging on that than I did and I think Commissioner Williams did as well. I didn't do any, so it wouldn't take much to do more than me. But we're looked for a fair amount of examples from Michigan and actually other cities that applied a form-based code. I'm reasonably certain that staff's got copies of the information that was collected, though I appreciate, thank you for that. In fact, I believe they had two different form-based code areas, two different regulating plans. So that might very well be a good start. Thank you for that, Commissioner Sullivan. Item 10, even though on-street parking isn't allowed overnight, spots are able to be counted. This had to do with the minimum parking requirement. The response from staff is that this has been addressed by city attorney and they will have frontage. I'm not sure what that means, I'm afraid. Commissioner Wolf?
I was going to ask what that means.
Yeah, that was written in the wrong space.
Oh, there you
A little
go.
confusing.
Oh, it applies to the evergreen properties?
Ah,
Yeah, I think
that helps a great deal.
I think that comment was supposed to be entered under number 9.
Yep, there you go. That makes sense.
So the implication then is that the requirement for frontage that's in the code is then not really a problem? Is that what we're assuming?
The city attorney is working with Mr. Hagan's attorney, but generally the city attorney stated that they would be considered having frontage in their particular situation, whether it's the current code or the form-based code. They're both requiring the same thing. So the particular Evergreen Avenue is not being abandoned at this point. So under those circumstances, it would still be right away and would be interpreted as having frontage.
Okay, but my question was not about the specific property. It was about the requirement in the code for frontage. I'm asking, is there still reason to question that requirement, possibly for other properties?
No.
We're comfortable with that.
And that's our current requirement, that you have to have frontage on a public street.
You have to have frontage or access to.
Access to.
Isn't the form-based code more specific about having frontage, or?
It says frontage and access.
In the form-based code?
In our current code.
Okay. I guess I thought the form-based code said that you must have frontage.
Right. So it's the same requirement we have now, because they'll still have to have access based on the current code for regulations that we have, lot standards.
Right now, it was my understanding that our only restriction regarding frontage has to do with special use permits. You can't get special use permit if you don't have frontage on a major street.
Right, we have that, but we also have in our site regulations or our lot regulations that you have to have frontage and access to a street.
But we have properties that don't have frontage and have been redeveloped. Like there's the property right behind Woody's that was split off. And there's also the hotel right next to them. They both have access, but they don't have frontage. And yet they are developed.
Do they not have frontage via an easement? Or does that not, maybe that doesn't count?
Yeah, I thought that was not frontage. That was access.
Okay.
Yeah, that's access.
Thank you.
We made a mistake in allowing that lot split.
Mr. Haywood?
Yeah, we actually realized that later. Staff had always interpreted it to mean some kind of access, but after rereading that, it was quite clear that it the lot had to abut on a public street or public right of way. So yeah, we erred in those upon staff's direction And we now understand what that policy is and move forward and adhere to that more literally. So, but in this draft, we'll have to look a little more closely about how it's worded here. Our conversation with the city attorney indicated that even if it says that it has to have frontage on a public street, just because it doesn't have a actual street in it, it still qualifies as frontage. Now, I don't know how that applies to the Avenue Form District and how it's worded there specifically, but our code in general, he was comfortable with saying, with his position that even if there's not a street there, it would if there's a right of way for a public way of some sort, whether it's vehicular or pedestrian, it still counts as frontage. But you raise a good question about how does all of this stitch together in terms of its language, and we'll look again specifically at this draft and how it's worded and revisit that. But he was comfortable both with the draft and how our code sits right now that it's frontage, even if there's no street there.
Commissioner Wolf, please.
Again, you're talking about the property on Evergreen, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm trying to get away from that specific property, and I still believe that the form-based code language is more strict about any sort of development on a property that does not have street frontage. And I wonder if you could check on that, compare how those two.
Do you remember what section that's located at?
No, I don't.
We'll find it. We'll find it.
Yeah.
Just as a guess, part 5 has to do with street configurations, and there was sort of the there were connectivity, perhaps under street connectivity. It seemed to me that there we talked about that a good deal, that sort of connection to an existing street or extension of an existing street. Just a thought. There's a fair amount of text there and I can't find it immediately.
That sounds like a likely place for it. It's either that or in the beginning of the building form standards, possibly in part 4.
Okay, then let's bring that back to item, if we're done with connectivity for the time being. Well, actually, is this something that, well, in this particular, well, actually, no, Commissioner Wolf has got some additional concerns or questions. So let's leave that there where it is for now. But back to item 10, even though on-street parking isn't allowed overnight, spots are available to be counted. That's the part that's referred to has to do with if on-street parking is provided along building frontage, those spaces may be counted toward parking requirements. I don't know, maybe it's not clear using that language, but I'd take that as if application is made for a specific number of spots and that can be justified as part of the parking plan, then spots in front of the in front of the property could be counted as part of that parking plan. And Ms. Schmidt had made a comment earlier in some earlier writing that that might potentially be used for barrier-free spots, I guess, depending on the configuration of the street and such. Any concerns about item 10? Commissioner Wolf.
I have noticed that the way we're treating parking in the form-based code is confusing to some people. And it's shown in this question. The fact that we don't have minimum requirements anymore, but we do require a parking plan, and the code does not specify how the parking plan will be evaluated. I'm reasonably comfortable with it. I think Ms. Schmidt had a comment in here earlier about, wasn't there something about wasn't there an earlier question
Yes.
about the parking?
Yep.
About the ADA, right? And it was, for example, the parking plan serves to make sure that the proposed parking does not have the potential to impact other properties. So the parking plan will be looked at, and if it appears that it's insufficient in some way, my understanding is it would not necessarily be approved. If it looked as though they didn't have enough and it was going to overflow onto other properties or something like that. So they are still submitting a plan for approval. They have to make their best case that that is adequate parking and laid out properly and so forth. It's not 100% guaranteed to be approved. And I don't know if there's some way to convey all that better. People look at it and see that it says there's no minimum, and then they're kind of lost as to just what's going to happen with the parking plan. So I'm rambling on a bit, but I see why it is a little confusing.
So your point is, I think you weren't rambling on. You stated it exactly. That basically it's possible that no parking spaces are required or desired, and that would be demonstrated as part of the proposed parking plan. But if indeed some spaces are required or desired, I guess, then that would be revealed in the parking plan as well. That if in order to provide access, barrier-free access, or in order to avoid encroaching on another property, the parking plan might actually reveal that there will be more required than originally thought, but that there is no specific set minimum. Might very well be 0, but it might be 2, it might be 5. That the parking plan will demonstrate that. And then we start to get into some material questions. PVC or comparable material should be allowed. I'm not seeing any. Commissioner Sullivan?
Am I mistaken, or is that just referring to vinyl products? And I know that there are other materials that can be used, like a concrete-based material, for example. So, I mean, it's a good point, but I think it just means vinyl.
Yeah, and I actually thought that there was another one that specifically referred to some different concrete materials. Again, I would say that it's entirely possible that PVC or comparable material, some sort of synthetic wood substitute would be appropriate. Just that in its current form, I'm comfortable with the list, personally comfortable with the list that's in place, and that should something need to be added later, that's fine.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing we'd want to avoid essentially is the cheap vinyl looking products with the flimsy plastic. And I don't know how to write it to avoid those specifically.
Probably not like that, but your description is apt. Item 12, why have such restriction about the number of windows? Why require 7-inch separation in those windows? It's believed that that's too restrictive. Perhaps, again, we did talk about this an awful lot, not necessarily this item, but a lot of questions about windows and number and orientation and so on. And I think that this might very well be withdrawn, but unless I see any great objection immediately, I'm inclined to let it ride. Again, with the knowledge that it could come out later. Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, what is the 7-inch that they're referring to?
It's under, so D.
Yeah, I just found it.
Yeah, and I think I remember we did talk about this. 7 is actually pretty wide in terms of the sort of separations between individual windows. It's something that you would see, sort of as a vestige of the old if it were a double hung, that would be the place where the weight pocket would be. And so you'd want to have them separated by a fair distance because the weights aren't small. It might very well be that one gets pulled, but unless there's a great objection, you should stay now, Commissioner Wolf. Do you have a great objection?
Yeah, well, no, but I think maybe that's being interpreted wrong. What it's saying is that 5 windows may be grouped together horizontally with no separation whatsoever between those 5 windows. They can be touching each other. And then they must be, if there's another group of up to 5 next to them, then there has to be a certain minimum separation. It's trying to avoid a complete horizontal band of windows is the intent.
I agree.
And that's not quite what I get when I read the question.
No, I agree with you, both in your reading of the standard and in it's Mr. Hagan's objection. I think that the point is both. I mean, ultimately the question is a separation between 5 windows required or not, right? That's really what he's asking here, whether he was counting it as 1 or 5 or 3. And I think that the question stands that it might very well be something that gets pulled in the future, but I think for the time being, unless again, there's any great objection to that, just keep it in place for now.
Yeah, I mean, if he wanted to put in 2 or 3 or 4 windows or whatever with separations between them, they could have less separation. You could have 2 windows only 6 inches away from each other because they would not fall under this restriction on groupings of windows. So I'm not sure what he's picturing that he thinks he would be prevented from doing.
Yeah, it might very well be just a misinterpretation that the expectation that I don't know, is he on? No. That interpreting it the way that you had expected or you had thought, that there's basically 7 inches between each window, which is what I was thinking when I read this as well, without going back to the source. Item 13, let me see, this actually has to do with page 49, D1B. Oh, this has to do with exterior shutters. And I know Commissioner Boyle feels very strongly about this, and so do I. I can't argue with the idea that shutters make a nice splash of color. They really do look better when they're of a width that is half of the width of the existing window. Again, whether that's something that's going to make or break this code, I couldn't say, unless anybody has any great objection. The idea, of course, is that that if the shutters are closed, they should be half the width of the window, so they cover the window, even if they're not operable. It just, by and large, it's more appropriate. It's nicer. It's kinder. How about that? Anybody really want to see thin windows or thin shutters that wants that stricken? We'll leave that for council to mull over. No pun intended. Item 14, sliders aren't allowed. Are cottage and reverse cottage considered double hung? Again, I suspect sliders could be included, and reverse cottage and cottage windows, cottage style windows. Cottage style windows are double hungs, but the lower sash is typically deeper than the upper sash. So maybe a 2-foot upper sash and a 4-foot lower sash that only slides up partially behind. So again, this probably was an omission, but could be brought back in. Stop me if this is too quick. Item 15, mechanical equipment. These restrictions are nice on paper, but not always possible to accomplish. We need more flexibility. Sorry, this is page 51, item D. having to do with the placement of mechanical equipment. And Mr. Mrozowski had raised questions about this as well. In fact, I think we talked about it briefly at our last meeting about, I called the property at the northeast corner of Grand River and Bailey as an example. I don't see this being written so as to prevent, I don't know exactly how to word it, but sort of smaller events where really what I think is intended here is that large mechanical equipment be screened or removed from the public right of way or from view from the public right of way. Commissioner Wolf, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that as we've talked about in part 2, that there are provisions for any applicant to request an exception to the architectural standards. So if somebody really has a problem in some way they cannot comply with the mechanical equipment or any of these, they can request an exception and make their best case for that exception. And so there is possibility for flexibility in this.
Absolutely. And then finally, item 16, would stacked parking spots be considered efficient or inefficient parking? The code, and Ms. Schmidt replies, the code as it currently written does not prevent stacked parking. I think if you can get people to cooperate, it's probably more efficient than non-stacked parking, because you only have to have one sort of a single loaded corridor could actually accommodate 2 or more cars if you can get people to communicate with one another and move their car when they need to get access. That brings us to the end of this list. Oh, excuse me. The final item is a topic that must be added to the requirements of the Avenue Forum District through changes in the current code. And this is adding the universal design requirements to the Avenue document. Staff will assure that this provision is included in the ordinance and likely in the purpose and scope section at the beginning of the ordinance, similar to Division 1 of Article 5. That brings us to the end of our list. We are still a couple of items that presumably will remain for a later meeting. Those items that Ms. Schmidt is currently either asking the attorney for advice, or there was a staff report for a couple of items too, right? So there were a couple of things that were likely additional information prior to a vote of the Planning Commission. Any items that you want to go back and take a look at? Again, excuse me, the next bit is the definitions, then the memo from the city attorney, and then a fair amount of the correspondence that was distilled into the document we just finished. So I think we're at a point now, but for those items that require opinion of the city attorney and staff reports, the document's in a pretty good place to send on to council. Good for us. Any, well done, folks. All right, so we'll probably see this one more time then. One more time at a Planning Commission meeting, and then times after that. Commissioner Wolf.
I'm not quite sure I'm clear on where we go from here. Did you mean another work session?
I'm thinking that maybe not a separate work. I don't know. So my thinking is that there were 2 items. Let me scroll down. There was one item that the city attorney was still working on. Let me go back to the page actually, so I can. So these were topics that may require more discussion and likely additional information prior to a vote of the Planning Commission. Item 1, well, actually the bonus discussion, I think we solved that, did we not? Or we've determined that the pay in lieu of would be removed and everything else would stay. Item 2, there's a staff memo forthcoming to summarize the solution regarding multifamily housing in M3 and M4. I thought that there was one more item. Again, an opinion from the city. There we go. Above the item above, or the section above, item 25. Opinion from the city attorney how overlays will be impacted. And the one above that, 24, an opinion from city attorney about how ordinance 900 will impact the form-based code. So 2 attorney opinions and 1 staff memo should, I think, get us to the point where we're comfortable with the document after we see those 2 things. Mr. Haywood.
Yeah, I had a couple other things on my list as takeaways from this meeting that we should be working on. First is kind of in line with the payment in lieu of discussion. It's that other item, D1, requiring a public park or civic green. I think we should specifically ask the city attorney if he could comment on that, if that's still a thing we can require. And then,
sorry, Mr. Haywood, you're talking specifically about Commissioner Wolf's question regarding the not paying payment in lieu of, but just building, say, adjacent to one's property or on other property owned?
Well, we were going to strike D2, but D1 would remain, and that would require that they construct a public park or plaza of some sort.
Right.
So I mean, if we can't do a payment in lieu of, but we're asking them to build a public park as part of the bonus, I just want to make sure that, because he didn't really comment on that. So
That's
I want
fine. Okay, just clarify that.
Because if there's some, I mean, I've heard some concerns in the past about requiring public, something for public use, whether we can do that like that. So I just want to be clear about it. And then I had also to further analyze what it means about, frontage on a public street and how that affects future development. I want to talk about that a little bit more internally. And then we need to find examples of form-based code that resulted in economic uplift.
Right. And I actually have one thing on my list that we keep sort of circling around it, but it might require much like the public park or civic green, is how alleys are going to be handled. I mean, we can deal with, I think we've got a mechanism, by which if alleys are to be required, how we develop the lots before the entire alley is, the sort of alley property is assembled, all the alley land is assembled. But the question ultimately is, I seem to remember part of his reading in the stuff I was reading about in his opinion that touched on it, but not specifically. That, if it's taken for a public purpose, or if it's used for a public purpose, but it doesn't necessarily have to transfer ownership. At any rate, some specifics about how the alleys could be developed, and some of the difficulties that are likely to come from that. Yeah, so I love the idea. I think it's going to be a trick to get it to work. Any other thoughts? Commissioner Wolf?
So I still have more or less the same question. We need to have this on the agenda of one regular meeting in order to vote on it and forward it to City Council, correct?
I see what you're saying.
Will that be our next action on this, or do we expect to have another work session? I know we had a timeline for this, and I'm not sure where we are on it anymore.
Well, Ms. Schmidt, please.
Yeah, I think we need just a short work session to wrap up some of these things that we have hanging out there. And then at a regular meeting, we can take action to vote on the changes that we've made to the document. And that Dave might have a different opinion, but I think that's going to be our best direction.
I think that seems reasonable. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks for raising that. Any remaining questions? All right, then that'll move us on to item 10, Commissioner concerns. Fortunately, seeing no hands. And then on to item 11, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Cahill, so moved.
Wolf, second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Wolf to adjourn our meeting this evening. Let's do a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed. We are adjourned at 8:43. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good
Night,
night.
everybody.
Thank
Aye.
you.
Everyone.
Night.
Aye.